Karen Martinez stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:30 in the morning, brushing her teeth with more excitement than she had felt in months. Today was the day she had been dreaming about for 3 long years. London was finally happening. She had saved every single penny from her job and its statewide insurance, skipping dinners out with friends, avoiding new clothes, and even canceling her Netflix subscription just to make this trip possible. The small apartment in Ohio that she called home looked different now, with travel guides scattered across her coffee table and sticky notes covering her refrigerator with reminders about what to pack. She walked to her closet and pulled out the red dress she had bought specifically for this day. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she owned, costing her 2 weeks of lunch money, but she wanted to look perfect for her photos at Buckingham Palace. Karen held the dress up against herself in the mirror and smiled. The bright red color made her feel confident and important, like she was dressed for something special. She had practiced taking selfies in this dress the night before, trying different angles and poses until she found the ones that looked best. After getting dressed, Karen carefully packed her designer handbag, another splurge she had justified because it would appear in all her vacation photos. Inside the bag, she placed her passport, wallet, hotel keycard, travel insurance papers, and her small can of pepper spray that she always carried for safety. Her father had given her the pepper spray years ago, when she first moved to the city, telling her that a woman traveling alone should always be prepared. She had never used it, but it made her feel safer knowing it was there. The most important item of all was her brand new camera that hung around her neck on a colorful strap. Karen had researched cameras for weeks, reading reviews and comparing prices before finally choosing this one. It had cost her more than her monthly rent, but she told herself it was an investment in memories that would last forever. She had already filled one memory card just taking pictures around London during her first 2 days. Pictures of Big Ben, the Thames River, red telephone boxes, and double-decker buses filled her phone and camera. Karen walked to her hotel window and looked out at the London streets below. The weather was absolutely perfect, with clear blue skies and gentle sunshine that made everything look like a postcard. She had checked the weather forecast every day for the past month, worried that rain might ruin her palace photos. But today looked like it was going to be exactly what she had hoped for. She could already imagine herself posting the photos on social media with captions about living her best life in London. At breakfast in the hotel restaurant, Karen could barely eat her eggs and toast because of the butterflies in her stomach. She kept checking her phone for the time and looking at the map app to make sure she knew exactly how to get to Buckingham Palace. The hotel staff noticed her excitement, and the concierge even gave her some tips about the best spots for taking photos. He warned her that the guards were not allowed to talk or move, but Karen just nodded politely. She had seen movies about royal guards and thought she knew what to expect. After breakfast, Karen walked through the London streets with a spring in her step. Everything seemed magical to her American eyes. The old buildings, the accents she heard from people walking by, even the different way the cars looked made her feel like she was in a fairy tale. She stopped several times to take pictures of herself in front of famous landmarks, asking strangers to help her get the perfect shot. As she got closer to Buckingham Palace, Karen felt her heart beating faster with anticipation. She had dreamed about this moment during many difficult days at work, especially after her divorce last year, when everything in her life felt like it was falling apart. This trip represented a new beginning for her, a chance to prove to herself that she could be independent and adventurous. The palace grew larger and more impressive as she walked, and Karen knew that in just a few minutes she would be standing in front of one of the most famous buildings in the world, ready to capture the perfect memory of her perfect day. Karen arrived at the tall black gates of Buckingham Palace and felt her breath catch in her throat. The building was even more beautiful than she had imagined from all the pictures she had seen online. The golden details sparkled in the morning sunlight, and the perfectly manicured gardens stretched out in neat rows of colorful flowers. She pulled out her camera immediately and started taking photos of the palace from different angles, trying to capture its grandeur through her lens. As she moved closer to the gates, Karen noticed that the crowds were much smaller than she had expected. She had read online that thousands of tourists visited every day, but this morning felt almost peaceful. Only a few other people were scattered around taking pictures, which made Karen feel like she had the place almost to herself. This was perfect because it meant she could take her time getting the ideal shots without having to push through crowds or wait in long lines. That's when she saw him. Standing perfectly still beside the palace entrance was a royal guard in his traditional uniform. He wore a bright red coat with shiny gold buttons, black pants with a red stripe down the side, and the famous tall black hat that Karen had seen in so many movies and TV shows. His face was serious and focused straight ahead, and he held his rifle in exactly the same position that guards had held them for hundreds of years. Karen felt a thrill of excitement run through her body. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Karen approached the guard slowly, holding her camera ready. She had practiced this moment in her mind so many times. She would stand next to the guard, take a selfie, and then ask another tourist to take a photo of both of them together. She imagined posting these photos on Facebook and Instagram, showing all her friends back home that she was really here, really living her dream vacation in London. When she was about 6 feet away from the guard, Karen called out cheerfully, "Excuse me, sir. Would it be okay if I took a photo with you?" The guard did not move. He did not look at her. He did not even blink. His eyes stayed focused on some invisible point in the distance. Karen waited for a few seconds, thinking maybe he had not heard her clearly. She tried again, speaking a little louder. "Hello there. I'm visiting from America. Could I please get a picture?" Still nothing. The guard remained as still as a statue. Karen began to feel a small flutter of frustration in her stomach, but she told herself that maybe he was just being professional. She moved closer, now standing just 3 feet away from him. She could see the details of his uniform up close, the way his buttons reflected the sunlight, and the serious expression on his face. She raised her camera and took a few photos of him alone, hoping that the sound of the camera clicking might get his attention. Other tourists had started to notice what was happening. A family from Germany stood nearby watching, and an elderly couple from Australia whispered to each other while pointing in Karen's direction. Some people had their phones out, recording what they thought might be an amusing interaction between an American tourist and a British guard. Karen felt their eyes on her and suddenly became very aware that she was becoming part of the entertainment for other people. Karen moved even closer until she was just 2 feet away from the guard. She could hear him breathing steadily and see the small details of his facial expression. His eyes were focused and alert, but he continued to ignore her presence completely. Karen reached out her hand and gently tapped his arm, saying in what she thought was a friendly voice, "Excuse me, I just want one quick photo. It will only take a second." The moment her hand touched his red sleeve, Karen felt a spark of anger begin to build inside her chest. She had spent thousands of dollars to come here. She had saved money for 3 years. She had gotten up early and dressed in her best clothes. And now this guard was treating her like she did not even exist. Karen felt her face getting hot as embarrassment and anger mixed together in her chest. The guard still had not moved even after she touched his arm. He continued staring straight ahead, like she was completely invisible. Behind her, she could hear other tourists talking in hushed voices and the sound of phone cameras clicking. Someone giggled quietly, and Karen felt like everyone was laughing at her. She had come all this way to have this special moment, and instead she was being humiliated in front of strangers. The past year had been incredibly difficult for Karen. Her divorce had been messy and expensive, draining both her savings and her emotional energy. Her ex-husband had made her feel small and unimportant during their marriage, always dismissing her ideas and dreams. Work at the insurance company had become stressful too, with her boss constantly criticizing her and threatening to cut her hours. This vacation was supposed to be her chance to feel important again, to do something just for herself and prove that she could be independent and confident. Now, standing in front of this silent guard, All those old feelings of being ignored and dismissed came rushing back. Karen's hands started to shake slightly as her frustration grew stronger. She looked around at the other tourists who were clearly watching her struggle to get the guards' attention. A group of teenagers with their phones out were definitely recording everything, probably planning to post her embarrassing moment on social media for everyone to see. Karen turned back to the guard and spoke louder, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "I'm talking to you. I just want one simple photograph. This is supposed to be customer service." Her words echoed off the palace walls, and more people turned to look at what was happening. The guard's expression remained unchanged, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance that only he could see. His breathing was steady and calm, showing no sign that he had heard anything Karen said. The anger inside Karen continued to build like a fire, getting bigger. She thought about all the money she had spent to get here, all the overtime hours she had worked, all the things she had given up to make this trip possible. She thought about her ex-husband telling her she was being stupid for wanting to travel alone, and her coworkers who had made jokes about her taking selfies with guards. Everyone seemed to think her dreams were silly and unimportant. Karen reached into her designer handbag, her hands moving without her really thinking about what she was doing. Her fingers found the small metal canister of pepper spray that her father had given her years ago. She had carried it everywhere as protection, but had never actually used it. The weight of it felt solid and real in her palm. As she pulled it out, some part of her mind tried to warn her that this was a bad idea, but the anger was now louder than any reasonable thoughts. She held the pepper spray up so the guard could see it clearly. Her voice was sharp and angry as she shouted, "Maybe this will get your attention. Maybe this will make you look at me." The other tourists immediately sensed that something serious was about to happen. The family from Germany started backing away, and the elderly Australian couple looked shocked and concerned. Someone in the crowd called out, "Don't do that, miss," but Karen was beyond listening to anyone else. The guard's training had prepared him for many situations, but he was required to maintain his position no matter what happened around him. His eyes remained focused straight ahead, even as he saw the small canister in Karen's hand from his peripheral vision. His muscles tensed slightly, but he did not move from his post. Karen pointed the pepper spray directly at the guard's face. Time seemed to slow down as she realized what she was about to do, but her finger was already pressing down on the trigger. The anger and frustration of the past year, combined with this moment of public humiliation, had pushed her beyond rational thinking. She squeezed the button and watched as the spray shot toward the guard's face. The pepper spray hit the guard directly in his face and eyes. The chemical burned his skin immediately, causing him to blink rapidly as tears started streaming down his cheeks. His nose began running, and he started coughing uncontrollably. But even through the pain and discomfort, his training kicked in. The guard tried his best to remain standing at his post, though his body was shaking from the burning sensation. His hands gripped his rifle tighter as he fought against the natural urge to rub his eyes or step away from his position. The crowd around them erupted in gasps and screams. Several people shouted warnings and others started running away from the scene. The German family quickly gathered their children and moved toward the palace gates. The teenagers who had been filming everything with their phones kept recording, capturing every second of the dramatic scene unfolding before them. Some tourists called out to Karen, telling her to stop, while others were already reaching for their phones to call for help. Karen stood frozen for a moment, suddenly realizing the enormity of what she had just done. The anger that had built up inside her disappeared instantly, replaced by shock and fear. She looked at the pepper spray canister still in her hand, as if she had never seen it before. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The guard was clearly in pain, coughing and trying to blink the burning chemical out of his eyes, and Karen felt a wave of horror wash over her. Within 30 seconds, the first security officers appeared, running toward them from different directions around the palace grounds. They wore dark uniforms and had serious expressions as they quickly assessed the situation. One officer immediately went to help the injured guard, while two others moved toward Karen. Behind them, more security personnel were approaching, along with what looked like police officers in their distinctive yellow vests. Karen backed away instinctively, still holding the pepper spray, not sure what to do with it. Her mind was racing with thoughts of what would happen next. She wanted to explain that she had not meant to really hurt anyone, that she was just frustrated and had acted without thinking. But before she could speak, one of the security officers was speaking firmly to her, telling her to put down the pepper spray and place her hands where they could see them. The guard she had sprayed was being led away by medical personnel who had arrived incredibly quickly. Karen could see that his eyes were red and swollen, and he was still coughing as they guided him toward what looked like a first aid station. The sight of his obvious pain made Karen feel sick to her stomach. She wanted to apologize to them, to explain that she had never intended for things to go this far, but the security officers were now surrounding her completely. Karen slowly placed the pepper spray on the ground and raised her hands above her head. Her designer handbag fell from her shoulder and scattered some of its contents across the pavement. One of the officers picked up the pepper spray with a gloved hand, while another began speaking into his radio, reporting the incident to someone in command. Karen could hear him describing what had happened using official-sounding words and codes that she did not understand. The police officers arrived and began questioning the tourists who had witnessed everything. Several people were eager to give their statements, describing exactly what they had seen and heard. The teenagers showed their phone recordings to the officers, providing clear evidence of what Karen had done. Some witnesses seemed angry about what they had seen, while others appeared sympathetic to Karen, perhaps understanding that she was a confused tourist who had made a terrible mistake. One of the police officers approached Karen and informed her that she was being arrested. As he spoke the formal words about her rights, Karen felt like she was in a movie or a bad dream. This could not really be happening to her. She had come to London to take pictures and have fun, not to hurt someone and get arrested. But as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, reality hit her completely. Her perfect vacation had turned into a nightmare that would change her life forever. The London jail cell was nothing like the hotels Karen had researched for months before her trip. The small room had gray concrete walls, a narrow metal bed with a thin mattress, and a toilet in the corner that offered no privacy. The fluorescent light above flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows that made Karen feel even more alone and frightened. She sat on the edge of the hard bed, still wearing her red dress that now felt completely wrong for the situation she was in. Sleep was impossible that first night. Every time Karen closed her eyes, she saw the guard's face covered in pepper spray, his eyes red and watering from the chemicals she had released. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, wishing desperately that she could go back and make a different choice. The anger she had felt seemed so stupid now, so small compared to the massive consequences she was facing. She had never been in trouble with the law before, not even a parking ticket, and now she was in a foreign country facing serious criminal charges. The next morning, a woman in a business suit came to see Karen. She introduced herself as a duty solicitor, explaining that she was a lawyer appointed by the court to help people who could not afford their own legal representation. The woman had kind eyes, but a serious expression as she sat across from Karen in a small interview room. She opened a thick folder and began explaining the charges that were being filed against her. Karen felt her stomach drop as she heard the legal terms. Assault on a public servant was the main charge, but there were others too. Disrupting the peace, aggressive behavior in a public place, and something called potential terrorism charges because she had attacked someone who was protecting the royal family. The lawyer explained that these charges could result in several years in prison and thousands of pounds in fines. Karen started crying as she realized that her entire life was falling apart because of one moment of poor judgment. The lawyer asked Karen about her financial situation and her life back in America. Karen explained about her job at the insurance company, her recent divorce, and how she had saved for 3 years to afford this vacation. The legal fees alone would cost more than everything she had saved, and that did not even include potential fines or compensation she might have to pay to the guard. Karen felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the British legal system and scared about what would happen to her. Karen was allowed one phone call, and she decided to call her younger sister Sarah back in Ohio. Sarah answered on the second ring, and Karen immediately burst into tears as she tried to explain what had happened. Sarah had seen some news reports about an American tourist attacking a royal guard, but she had never imagined it could be her own sister. Karen begged Sarah to help her with bail money and to contact their parents, though she dreaded having to explain this embarrassing situation to her family. The news had already spread far beyond London. Karen learned that the incident had been filmed by multiple tourists, and the videos were now viral on social media platforms. Her name and face were being shared across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, with thousands of people commenting on her actions. Some comments were sympathetic, understanding that she was a frustrated tourist who had made a mistake, but many others were harsh and critical, calling her entitled and disrespectful. Back in Ohio, Karen's boss at Statewide Insurance had seen the viral videos. The company had a strict policy about employees whose actions could damage the company's reputation. Karen's supervisor called Sarah to inform her that Karen's employment was being reviewed and that she should not expect to return to her position when she got back to America. This news hit Karen like another punch to the stomach, as she realized that even if she managed to deal with the legal troubles in London, she would be returning home to unemployment and financial ruin. Karen spent her days in jail reading the few books available and trying to write letters to her family. She wrote draft after draft of apologies to the guard she had hurt, though she had no way to send them. The other women in jail were mostly kind to her, understanding that she was clearly out of her element and scared. Some shared their own stories of making bad decisions in moments of anger or stress, helping Karen feel less alone in her situation. 3 days after the incident, Karen was sitting in her cell reading when a guard came to tell her she had a visitor. She assumed it would be the duty solicitor again, or perhaps someone from the American embassy. Instead, she was led to the same small interview room where she had met with her lawyer, but this time there were 2 people waiting for her. One was a well-dressed man who introduced himself as a solicitor representing the royal guard she had pepper sprayed. The other person made Karen's heart skip a beat. It was the guard himself, wearing civilian clothes instead of his red uniform. Karen had only seen him in his official capacity, standing still and silent at his post. Now, sitting across from her in a simple blue sweater and jeans, he looked much younger than she had realized. His eyes still showed some redness from the pepper spray, but they were clear and focused as he looked at her directly for the first time since their encounter at the palace. Karen immediately started apologizing, the words tumbling out of her mouth before anyone else could speak. She told him how sorry she was, how she had never meant to hurt him, and how she understood that she had made a terrible mistake. Tears ran down her face as she tried to explain about her divorce, her job stress, and the pressure she had felt to make her vacation perfect. She expected anger, hatred, or at least cold indifference from the man she had attacked. Instead, the guard introduced himself as James Wellington and spoke in a calm, measured voice. He explained that he had been working as a royal guard for 8 years and had encountered difficult situations with tourists before, though nothing quite like what Karen had done. He had spent the past 3 days thinking about the incident and reading the police reports about Karen's background and situation. Rather than anger, he felt something closer to concern and curiosity about what had driven her to such an extreme action. James told Karen that he had grown up in a working-class family in Manchester and understood what it meant to work hard and save money for something important. He could see from the police reports that she had spent years planning and saving for this trip, and that recent personal difficulties had made her emotional and stressed. While he could not excuse what she had done, he could understand that she was not a violent person who had planned to hurt anyone, but rather someone who had reached a breaking point in a moment of frustration. Karen was amazed by James's calm and rational response. She had expected him to want maximum punishment for her actions, but instead he seemed genuinely interested in understanding her as a person rather than just as someone who had attacked him. His lawyer explained that James had a proposal that might help resolve the situation in a way that would be beneficial for everyone involved, though it would require Karen to agree to certain conditions. James suggested that instead of pursuing the most serious charges against Karen, he would be willing to support a plea arrangement that focused on education and community service rather than lengthy imprisonment. He proposed that Karen should spend time learning about British culture, the role of royal guards, and the importance of respecting traditions and customs when visiting other countries. He offered to personally help with this education process, meeting with Karen regularly to teach her about the history and significance of the Royal Guard tradition. The lawyer explained that this arrangement would still require Karen to plead guilty to assault charges and complete a significant amount of community service. She would also need to pay for James's medical expenses and attend anger management counseling to address the issues that had led to her outburst. However, if she agreed to these terms and completed everything successfully, the more serious charges could be dropped, and she could avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Karen could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had expected months or even years in prison, followed by deportation back to America, with a criminal record that would follow her forever. Instead, this man she had hurt was offering her a chance at redemption and education rather than punishment. She looked at James with gratitude and asked why he was willing to help her when she had caused him pain and embarrassment. James explained that he believed in second chances and that he could see Karen was genuinely remorseful for her actions. He had been raised to believe that people could learn and change from their mistakes if given proper guidance and support. He also mentioned that the international attention the incident had received could be turned into something positive if it showed that conflicts could be resolved through understanding and forgiveness rather than just punishment. Karen agreed immediately to James's proposal, feeling a mix of relief and overwhelming gratitude. She promised to do whatever was necessary to make up for her actions and to learn from this experience. As James and his lawyer prepared to leave, Karen asked if she could write him a proper letter of apology once she had time to think about everything he had told her. James agreed and gave her a small smile, the first time she had seen any warmth in his expression since they had met. 2 weeks later, Karen was released on bail and staying at a small bed and breakfast near the courthouse while she waited for her case to be resolved. The arrangement James had proposed was moving forward, and Karen found herself in the strange situation of meeting regularly with the man she had pepper-sprayed. Their first meeting outside of the jail was at a quiet cafe in Covent Garden, far from the tourist crowds and media attention that had surrounded the original incident. James arrived exactly on time, carrying a small bag filled with books and papers. He had changed out of his civilian clothes into a neat button-down shirt and jacket, looking every bit the professional educator he was about to become. Karen felt nervous as she waited for him, still struggling to believe that the man she had hurt was now trying to help her. She had spent hours preparing for this meeting, writing down questions and practicing what she wanted to say to him. Over tea and biscuits, James began teaching Karen about the history of the Royal Guards. He explained that the tradition went back hundreds of years, when guards had to stand watch to protect the royal family from real threats. He showed her pictures from old books, describing how the uniforms had evolved and what each piece of clothing represented. Karen found herself genuinely fascinated by the stories, realizing that she had never thought of the guards as real people with a serious job to do. James told her about his own journey to becoming a royal guard. He had joined the army straight from school, served overseas, and then applied for the prestigious position at Buckingham Palace. The training was intense and demanding, requiring months of practice to learn how to stand perfectly still for hours, ignore distractions, and maintain dignity under all circumstances. Only a small percentage of applicants were accepted, and James felt honored to represent his country in this traditional role. As they talked, Karen began to share more about her own life. She told James about growing up in Ohio, her parents who worked multiple jobs to support the family, and her dreams of traveling the world. She explained how her marriage had gradually made her feel small and unimportant, and how the divorce had left her feeling lost and angry. The vacation to London was supposed to be her chance to prove to herself that she could be independent and confident, but instead it had become the worst mistake of her life. James listened carefully to everything Karen said, asking thoughtful questions about her experiences and feelings. He told her about his own challenges, including the physical demands of standing guard for hours in all weather conditions, and the emotional difficulty of dealing with rude or aggressive tourists while maintaining professional composure. He admitted that her attack had shaken him more than he initially wanted to admit, not just because of the physical pain, but because it had made him question whether his service was respected or valued by the people he was meant to protect. Over the following weeks, their meetings became a regular part of both their schedules. James would bring different books and materials each time, teaching Karen about British history, royal traditions, and the cultural significance of ceremonies and customs. Karen discovered that she had a genuine interest in learning about other cultures and began reading additional books on her own time. She started keeping a journal about what she was learning, writing down her thoughts and reflections on how differently she now understood the role of the Royal Guards. Karen also began sharing more personal stories with James, and he did the same with her. She learned that he had lost his father when he was young and had been raised by his mother, who worked as a nurse. His discipline and dedication came from wanting to honor his father's memory and make his mother proud. James learned that Karen had always felt overlooked and dismissed by people in her life, which helped him understand why his silence at the palace had triggered such a strong reaction in her. As their friendship developed, both Karen and James began to see each other as complete human beings rather than just the tourist and the guard from that one difficult day. Karen realized that James was intelligent, kind, and deeply committed to his values of service and tradition. James saw that Karen was fundamentally a good person who had made a terrible decision during a moment of emotional crisis, but who was willing to work hard to make amends and learn from her mistake. Their meetings also helped both of them deal with the media attention that continued to follow the story. Reporters had tried to contact both of them, and social media was still buzzing with opinions about the incident. Some people criticized James for being too forgiving, while others praised him for showing mercy and understanding. Karen faced much harsher judgment, with many people calling her entitled and disrespectful. However, having James's support and friendship made it easier for both of them to ignore the outside criticism and focus on the positive work they were doing together. By the end of the month, Karen felt like she had learned more about British culture and history than many people who had lived in England their whole lives. More importantly, she felt like she had gained a true friend in James, someone who had seen her at her worst moment and still believed she could become a better person. James found that teaching Karen had rekindled his own passion for the traditions he protected and had given him a new perspective on the importance of education and understanding in bridging cultural differences. 6 months later, Karen's life looked completely different from the day she had first stepped off the plane in London with dreams of a perfect vacation. She stood outside the same cafe in Covent Garden, where she and James had shared their first educational meeting. But now she was waiting for him as a friend rather than as someone fulfilling a court requirement. The autumn weather was crisp and clear, and Karen felt a sense of peace that had been missing from her life for years. Karen had successfully completed all 200 hours of her community service at a local food bank in East London. The work had been physically demanding but emotionally rewarding, helping her connect with people from different backgrounds and circumstances. Many of the clients she served were immigrants and refugees who, like her, were trying to build new lives in a foreign country. Through their stories, Karen learned about resilience, hope, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Her anger management counseling had been equally transformative. The therapist had helped Karen understand that her outburst at the palace was the result of years of suppressed frustration and feelings of powerlessness. Learning to recognize and manage her emotions had given Karen tools for dealing with stress and disappointment in healthier ways. She had even started practicing meditation and mindfulness techniques that helped her stay calm in difficult situations. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Karen's life had undergone major changes. As expected, she had lost her job at the insurance company. But this setback had led to unexpected opportunities. A nonprofit organization that worked with people dealing with anger and emotional issues had seen news coverage of her story and offered her a position as a program coordinator. The job paid less than her previous position, but it gave Karen a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had been missing from her corporate work. Karen had kept in touch with James through weekly video calls and emails throughout her time completing the court requirements. Their friendship had grown stronger as they shared updates about their lives and continued to learn from each other. James had been promoted within the Royal Guard ranks, partly due to the positive attention his compassionate response had brought to the service. He had become something of a role model for how to handle difficult situations with grace and understanding. The media attention around their story had gradually shifted from sensational coverage of the original incident to inspired reports about forgiveness, friendship, and the possibility of positive outcomes from negative events. Several newspapers had written feature articles about James and Karen, and they had even been invited to speak at conferences about conflict resolution and cultural understanding. However, both of them preferred to keep their friendship private and focus on their personal growth rather than public attention. On this particular day, Karen was returning to London not as a tourist or a defendant, but as a volunteer. She had arranged to spend 2 weeks helping at the same food bank where she had completed her community service, using vacation time from her new job to give back to the community that had helped her heal. James had offered to show her some parts of London she had never seen, places that tourists rarely visited, but that would give her a deeper understanding of the city and its people. When James arrived at the cafe, he was dressed in casual clothes and carried a small backpack filled with maps and guidebooks. They had planned to spend the day exploring some of London's lesser-known neighborhoods, visiting local markets, museums, and parks that showed the real character of the city beyond its famous landmarks. Karen felt excited about seeing London through the eyes of someone who truly loved and understood the place he called home. As they walked through the streets together, Karen reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day at Buckingham Palace. She had learned not just about British culture and history, but about herself and what it meant to truly take responsibility for her actions. The friendship with James had shown her the power of forgiveness and the possibility of building something positive from even the worst mistakes. James had also grown from their friendship. Working with Karen had reminded him why he loved his job and his country, and had given him new appreciation for the importance of cultural exchange and understanding. He had seen how someone from a completely different background could learn to respect and value traditions that were important to him, and this had strengthened his belief in the possibility of building bridges between different peoples and cultures. Their friendship had attracted attention from people around the world who were inspired by their story of redemption and forgiveness. Teachers used their example in lessons about empathy and second chances. Counselors shared their story with clients who were struggling to forgive themselves or others. Religious leaders spoke about them as examples of grace and compassion in action. As they sat on a bench in a quiet London park, watching families play and couples walk their dogs, Karen finally felt ready to do something she had been planning for months. She pulled out her phone and opened up a photo she had been saving. It was a picture of her and James together, both smiling genuinely at the camera, taken by a fellow volunteer at the food bank during her community service. Karen asked James if he would be willing to take one more photo together, not for social media or publicity, but as a personal memory of their friendship and how far they had both come. James agreed, and they asked a passing jogger to take their picture in front of the beautiful garden they had been admiring. This time, the photo would represent not a tourist's attempt to capture a moment with a guard, but a genuine friendship between two people who had found something meaningful in an unlikely situation. Later that evening, as Karen prepared to return to Ohio the next day, she realized that her original dream of a perfect London vacation had actually come true, just not in any way she could have imagined. She had gotten so much more than photos and souvenirs from her time in London. She had gained a true friend, learned valuable lessons about herself, and discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. Most importantly, She had learned that even the worst mistakes could lead to unexpected blessings if approached with humility, openness, and a willingness to grow.